your mind.
Good evening, and welcome to Cult Free Radio. It's been 3.5 years since the last show, and I am glad to be back. I am your host, Mads Sweeney. If you have watched the show before, back in 2011 and 2012, you might recall that sometimes there may be inconsistent audio, there may be a few glitches that pop up now and then. But that's part of what makes the whole thing fun, part of what makes this a live show with some mixed media, some pre-recorded material also, and everything thrown together with basically just me to hold it all together and talk at the same time. So I've been reacquainting myself with the software, practicing this week, getting used to multitasking, walking around, chewing gum, and I think I've got it down pat again so that we can have a fun and informative show tonight. Now, you also might recall that this show is not about me getting my face on the camera. As you can see, there's... Okay, I'm back. I just mentioned that there probably wouldn't be any audio glitches because I've got the whole thing down pat, and the first thing I do is an audio glitch and turn off my own microphone. So, that's the kind of night it's going to be. This is Mads Sweeney, your host. I don't even remember how much you all have missed. It's only been like 30 seconds probably, so I think we're still good. Anyway, I am going to also incorporate a little bit of video, if that'll work. However, I'm not at home. I'm traveling for work right now. I am broadcasting from a hotel room, and I have no clue how good the internet really is. I mean, I've been using it for a day. It seems to work all right. But, I'm not making any promises, let me put it that way, about staying connected the entire time or anything like that. But if I disappear for a minute, just hang in there, I'll be right back, like just what happened when I turned off my own mic accidentally. I will be back on the air until the show is finished. Also, I will upload the show to YouTube, to my YouTube channel afterwards, and I'll probably edit out a lot of the glitches if there are any. But let's hope there aren't any from here on out, and things will work fine. It's a radio show, not a TV show, so if their video is choppy or whatever, that's okay, as long as the discussion works out okay. Now, if you're new to Cult Free Radio, and I suspect that's a good number of people, since it has been a few years since I've done a show, you might be wondering, who is this guy? Who is Mads Sweeney? What is this show all about? Well, so that the listeners who already know me and know Cult Free Radio don't need to hear the whole story again if they don't want to, I'm going to save all that explanation for the last segment of the show so that we can get to the good stuff first. And the people who know me and don't want to hear about me again can then log off and go to bed or do whatever you're doing in your part of the world. It may not be bedtime where you are, but it is for a lot of people, or it will be by the time the show's done. So who's Mads Sweeney? What's Cult Free Radio all about? That'll be towards the end of the show, the final part of tonight's agenda. And working back towards the present, we'll also have an interview with an ex-Jehovah's Witness from upstate New York, kind of near Buffalo. He'll share his experiences on leaving the organization, how that affected his family, his wife and kids, how it affected his Jehovah's Witness family, his worldly, aka normal, family, and how things are going now for him a few years later. And if I had to really pick a theme or a thread that sort of runs through the proceedings tonight, that theme or thread would be shunning. The thing that nearly all of us who are listening, if we're ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-cult members, we experience shunning. And it can cause a lot of frustration or sadness or anger or all at once among us former Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, I used to think that only fellow former Jehovah's Witnesses could comprehend what it's like to be shunned. But that was before the big story that has been in the cult-free world these last couple of weeks, which is the Australian Royal Commission. Now, what exactly is that? Why is it a big deal? What's going on? Well, the nation of Australia has formed something called the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Abuse. And this commission's been gathering information about how institutions deal with child abuse within their ranks. By institutions, they mean things like schools, summer camps, religious groups. Basically, any organization could be considered. Any organization that has children as members or deals with children in any way are considered by this commission. And so the commission solicited information from law enforcement and from the public over the last several months. And after collecting information from all across Australia, they have subpoenaed written statements and other documentation from the various institutions they're investigating. Now, all these organizations that have been looked at separately and what this commission calls case studies, and the Jehovah's Witnesses of Australia are case study number 29. If you're interested in Googling for more information, if you look for Australian Royal Commission, case study number 29, you will probably find what you're looking for. And you'll probably find a ton of information, official from the Commission and news websites as well. Now, the Commission explains on their site the scope and purpose of their inquiry, and this is what they say. They say the scope and purpose of the public hearing is to inquire into the experience of survivors of child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness Church in Australia. 2. The response of the Jehovah's Witness Church and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia Limited to allegations, reports, or complaints of child sexual abuse within the church. 3. The systems, policies, and procedures in place within the Jehovah's Witness Church and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia Limited for raising and responding to allegations of or concerns about child sexual abuse within the church. 4. The systems, policies, and procedures in place within the Jehovah's Witness Church and Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia Limited to prevent child sexual abuse within the church. And 5, any related matters. So they've collected all this input and information over the last several months. And then on the 27th of July, they began interviewing witnesses. And they have streamed live on the internet the testimony of these witnesses. And the witnesses include people that have been perhaps former witnesses who were victims of child sexual abuse, former elders who are currently disfellowshipped, high-ranking Watchtower branch officials and lawyers, elders who have also dealt with these cases within the congregations. And there's really so much to talk about when it comes to these hearings, and they just wrapped up a couple days ago, so I can't really do a full summary justice here on this show. But it'd be well worth your time to watch these hearings from start to finish if you have time, or at least read the transcripts, which are posted online. There's a Facebook group discussing the Australia Royal Commission. Case Study 29 with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and the transcripts are posted there. The transcripts are posted at the Royal Commission website. You can get transcripts, and also there are links to YouTube streams, YouTube videos of the live streaming that happened over the last couple of weeks. So it's worth it to watch. It's gripping. It's compelling. And some of the things that it proves and shows to anyone with an open mind, hopefully some Jehovah's Witnesses, is that A, there's a real big problem in the organization with pedophilia and covering it up rather than reporting it to protect children. And B, this is how it's going to apply to tonight's Cult Free Radio show, there are people, real, normal, worldly people, who've worked incredibly hard to understand the problem right down to its roots in the hierarchy of the organization and to protect Jehovah's Witness children from a religious cult that values its own status more than it values individual kids. Now, although the Commission has a huge and hard-working staff, there are two people who clearly are the face of this particular case study, and that would be the chair of the Commission, Justice Peter McClellan, and the counsel assisting the Commission, Mr. Angus Stewart. These two gentlemen have really shown an understanding of the Watchtower and of Jehovah's Witnesses hierarchy, the cult's methods of stifling abuse victims, and the way they cover up the child abuse that's rampant within the midst of that religion. And this leads to the topic of tonight's show, and that's shunning, because one of the points that Mr. Stewart brought out is that the threat of disfellowshipping, the shunning and ostracism that occurs, is something the organization uses to keep victims quiet about the pedophilia that goes on among Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses follow something called the two-witness rule, which was an old Israelite rule from the Bible's Mosaic Law that Jesus also happened to mention, stating that at the mouth of two witnesses a matter can be firmly established. So the Jehovah's Witnesses use that rule to state that if an accusation of child molestation is made against a Jehovah's Witness, there has to be two witnesses to that event for the elders to take any action against the molester. And if there's not, the Elder's Manual, which is a secret book that only elders are allowed to see until now, uses the phrase that we're all familiar with. They leave it in Jehovah's hands. In other words, they don't do anything else if there's not a second witness. Now, in recent years, they've tweaked the rule a little so that a molester can be considered the second witness himself if he confesses, or they can now also accept forensic evidence as a second witness. But there won't be any forensic evidence if it's not reported to the authorities. And a molester can always just deny it. And so if the victim hasn't been to the police or the hospital, there is no forensic evidence. There is no second witness. And as it happens so often, it's simply dropped and left in Jehovah's hands. Now, at the same time, from the perspective of the Jehovah's Witness congregation, the molester is considered not guilty, and so the victim is muzzled. The victim and her family cannot warn their friends in the congregation about the predator in their midst, because that would be considered slander, and then they would be disfellowshipped. Same goes for reporting to the authorities, Child Protective Services, or the police. The witnesses representing the Jehovah's Witnesses in this hearing, the active Jehovah's Witness elders claim, oh, this isn't true. Victims are free to report to the police, though they're not encouraged or discouraged from doing so. It's entirely up to them. But here's the thing. 1,006 pedophiles are on record from the Watchtower of Australia's files, and none of them were reported to the police. Now, of course, I'm summarizing an entire month's worth of data gathering and a couple of weeks' worth of testimony in, less than 15 minutes so far. So this is a very in-depth situation you can learn more about by looking at the Royal Commission website, talking in the Facebook group about it, and watching the hearings on YouTube. But the point is here that victims are not free to report Jehovah's Witnesses to the police. because they're not free to, quote, slander a, quote, brother without proof that he's a pedophile. And they are not, quote, free to just leave the congregation to escape this pedophile. You and I all know that there's no way to leave Jehovah's Witnesses with your complete dignity intact, with all of your friends and family structure completely unchanged, if not totally destroyed. But Justice McClellan and Mr. Stewart of the Commission, they actually get this. They understand it. They have driven that point home, and we'll see more of that later in the show. So now, before we get to that, let's hear from Joe Morgan. Joe Morgan's our guest tonight, and he's a former Jehovah's Witness from New York, and as a former Jehovah's Witness, like many of you and I, he, too, is shunned by some of his family members, all of his former friends in the congregation, for leaving the organization, and he's learning to deal with it, just like we've all learned to deal with it, or in a process of dealing. And I really enjoyed talking with Joe and hearing his story earlier this week, and I hope you do too. So here's Joe Morgan. Well, good evening, Joe. Thank you for joining us on Cult Free Radio.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. I want to start off by asking you some questions that will help our audience to get to know you a little bit better. And then we'll talk some more about your experiences as a Jehovah's Witness, as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and what you've been doing this summer in relation to all that. So first, how long were you one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Were you born or raised as a witness, or did you convert at a later time?
So I wasn't born as a witness. I think I was 7 years old when my dad was baptized. My mom baptized a year after. And then I was baptized at the tender age of 14, March 14th, 1998. And well, I guess that's the story of how I got in.
Okay, so you were raised in from a pretty early age, but you probably have some memories of perhaps some holidays or birthdays when you were really small.
Yeah, a few for sure. I remember. I still have some pretty vivid memories of going to the Catholic Church. Christmas is cloudy, but a few birthdays. Some, but I always considered myself, I guess, when other people said, were you raised, well, as they said, in the truth, I considered myself to be.
Yeah. I was at a similar age. My mom started studying when I was about 2 or 3 years old, and she was baptized probably when I was in kindergarten or first grade or so. And so, needs more cowbell.
I just set it off.
All right, thanks. So, yeah, I think our experiences are similar. When your parents join the Jehovah's Witnesses at that young an age, you're pretty much raised in the organization. I mean, your whole school years you're a witness,
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned when you were baptized at age 14?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So during the time...
He was doing it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. If you wait too much longer, then people start frowning on you and wondering what's wrong with you. Yeah. It's like also when you get to be like 19, 20, 21, then all the ones that were baptized 4 or 5 years earlier now start getting married. And it comes in a big wave then to one wedding after the other until all the kids in the hall are married. So, yeah. Yep, same here. I mean, I was a little bit earlier. I was a teen of the 80s, but yep, 21 years old, married.
Yep, me too.
Yep. Yeah. Mine sort of worked out, but we're still very good friends. We'll put it that way. So during the time you were a Jehovah's Witness, I mean, obviously you believed enough to get baptized, but then as you got older, did you still consider yourself a true believer, or did you feel like you were just kind of going along?
No, I was absolutely a true believer. I graduated high school, and I was right on the fence of whether I really wanted to be a history teacher. I loved history, and my mom was a special education teacher. My grandma was a teacher. My great-grandmother was a teacher. And on the other side, on my paternal side, we were farmers all the way back. And my brother wanted to be a farmer, and I wanted to be a teacher. But there were a few really strong personalities that came along, like just as I was making that decision on what to do when I was, senior year of high school, 18 years old. And, in spite of all of the indoctrination of being a witness and encouraged to pioneer or go to Bethel, I still was right on the brink of saying, I do want to go to college. I want to be a witness, but I really want to follow my dream of teaching high school history was my dream. So I did eventually decide not to do that because I had enough, honestly, pressure to pioneer. And so I gave up on college, decided to pioneer, and that's what I did for 4 years.
Okay. So 4 years as a pioneer when you could have spent those 4 years furthering your education. I think that's a pretty typical path for a teenage Jehovah's Witness.
Right.
That so as a pioneer at such a young age, most likely, I'm going to guess, you had some privileges in the congregation. What sort of privileges did you have?
I did. I was a ministerial servant by the time I was 18, I think. When I graduated high school, even after I graduated I was still, I'd passed up any scholarships or anything, but I still thought maybe I'd take a year off and go to school. And I went to unassigned territory, or seldom worked, whatever it was, in Indiana with my dad. And when I was there, I met a brother who actually he had been a high school teacher, and he had given it up to Pioneer. And so my 18-year-old self, fully indoctrinated at that point.
Oh, yeah. Role model.
Yes, oh my goodness. And this man, I don't know where he is today, but looking back, he was absolutely miserable, just a miserable person.
Mm-hmm.
When I look back and think about it now, and I didn't see the signs, but I took his example, and we also had a circuit overseer at the time who I actually had a really close relationship with, who really took an interest in me, and he was one of the big ones too that talked me out of it, and so that really broke it for me, like for sure. I'm gonna pioneer. Like that's gonna be my vocation. That will be my occupation. That will be what I do until the end.
Yeah, it seems like, not to go too far off on a tangent, but Jehovah's Witnesses are told how happy they are, and they're so used to believing everything that they're told that they believe that they're happy even when they're not.
Right.
I'm sure that that brother you met who had quit his job teaching to pioneer believed he was happy, even though
sure
he really wasn't.
The CO was the same way. He'd been a sailboat racer in California.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Oh yeah, and he told me one day we were in service, and I was asking him about it, and he said, he's like, you know what, Joe? He's like, I really would rather if you didn't talk about it because just talking about it, it makes it hard for me because I loved it so much, and I still, when I talk about it, it makes me want to go back.
Yeah.
And thinking about that now, it just breaks my heart.
Right. It's not being true to yourself and to who you really are. And that's got to cause some cognitive dissonance in your mind that you're not being who you really are meant to be. So speaking of that, even though you're fully engaged, you're a ministerial servant, you're a pioneer, looking back now, do you recall any things that maybe didn't quite sit right with you, or anything that you might have doubted or questioned but put on the shelf and had to wait on Jehovah, so to speak, in order to continue to pioneer yourself?
There's just so many things. I mean, when I look back, I see, oh my goodness, they're just, without number.
Mm-hmm.
But top of the list, I would say, I had some really good friends in high school. This is like the cognitive dissonance, but like as I'm going off to give up college and pioneer, I had a girlfriend that I was seriously involved with that was a non-witness from my senior class. So through her and a circle of friends, I met some really, really good people that I had to try to study with them all.
Right.
But then when I realized that they weren't going to come in, it didn't change the way that I felt about them. It didn't make me. I didn't view them as less worthy of being my friend because they didn't want to join my religion. I guess in my 18-year-old self maybe felt bad for them. I thought they were missing out, but I didn't. I know that on some level that bothered me, that I knew they were good people, and in a lot of ways I preferred being with them over people from my congregation. But I knew that I had to let them go. And unfortunately, I did.
Yeah.
And they all went off to college, and I went off to Pioneer, and that was the end of it. But that was one. Some of the other ones were, I guess, like the other people my age in the hall who would be, I thought that I had to, the only way to really be acceptable to Jehovah was to pioneer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see other kids who aren't doing it, and they're going and getting jobs, or maybe they're pioneering, but then they're doing all the things, 100 times worse than these worldly kids I wanted to hang out with.
Right.
On the weekends, but getting away with it because, they didn't talk about it. So that definitely bothered me. And that amongst other things. But at that age, like at 18, 19, I mean, that was really what I was focused on. I was pretty selfish at that point. I was trying to get my, make my name in the organization. And
yeah.
I wasn't thinking so much about other people. It was more about, me and my friends. So
right.
I'd say those are the first few little things that I look back and that I noticed.
Yeah. And at that time, because you're focused on being a good Jehovah's Witness, it is the type of thing that you put on the shelf, that you're told and taught that worldly people are not good, and your personal experience of your eyes, your ears, your senses, your experiences are that, worldly people are good. And so one of those thoughts has to go, or be stored away somewhere, so that if you were going to remain a Jehovah's Witness, the idea that your worldly friends are good people, you have to just shunt that to the side, lock it in that vault in your mind somewhere, until you finally escape, or until that vault is so full that it bursts, and then you're ready to get out. Which kind of leads me to where I'd sort of like to go next. Your current status, are you disfellowshipped, disassociated, inactive? What's your formal status?
I am formally, according to them, I am disfellowshipped.
Okay. And now, without divulging your sins, so to speak, was it Was it an intentional thing, or did you just get caught at some sort of sin, or was it philosophical reasons?
It's something that I actually gave an incredible amount of thought to, was because my wife and I, thankfully, we woke up over a ridiculously long period of time. The more I talk to people, what it took us was like 8 years, maybe.
Oh, wow.
From the time that we first really started really being open and honest about our strong doubts until the last meeting we went to was the district convention 2 years ago. And we had stopped going in service the October before that. So we were to the point where we knew that we didn't believe it, but we both came from incredibly strong, close, well-connected, very, I don't know what the word is, like respected families in the Western New York Jehovah's Witness community. So we had really good friends. I mean, even though we knew that we didn't believe the same things as them, we really didn't want to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we for a long time, I mean years and years, we tried to figure out a way that we could make this happen, that we could be honest about what we believed, but we didn't have to lose everyone. But when our oldest son, Finn, was born in 2009, that's really what broke it all apart for me. Was I cannot look my son in the eye and tell him that something is true that I know in my heart is not true. And so even knowing that, for the first year or two of his life, I tried to get away with it. And it wasn't until he got to that age where I'm like, I think he's starting to know when I say this is true, this isn't, people are asking him, Finn, where's Jehovah? And it would just make me cringe.
Mm.
And so we tried to fade, but our situation is really, really strange. I work on a farm that's a family farm with my dad and my brother. My dad's the coordinator of the body of elders for our local congregation. My brother is still a servant, but he is the school overseer. His wife is from another very well-connected, prominent, wealthy Buffalo Witness family. And so we just found ourselves in this really impossible situation where moving away wasn't an option because I don't have an education. The only income I know is the only job I know, which is the farm I've worked at my whole life. We've moved out here. We've renovated an old farmhouse and, put all this money into it. And here we are. And we have nowhere to go. We can't just up and move away with a few small children.
Right.
But, I have to work every day with very, very committed and devoted witnesses who are my family that I care about how they feel. But it got to the point where even with them, we said, we can't live this way. And I can't even tell you how many fights and nights crying and just, sitting on the floor, my sister and I, my dad and I, my mom and I, just crying because Sarah and I wanted to leave and there just wasn't a way out.
Yeah.
And so eventually, like I said, 2 years ago at the convention, it does become at some point when you fully are awake to what they're teaching in spite of the facts.
Yes.
You can't sit there and listen to it without it just like hurting your heart. And that's the way every assembly and every meeting and every convention began to feel for Sarah and I. So her mom actually had a part on that convention, and my brother and his wife had a part on that convention. And I feel like it was just everything came to a head that day. And we just walked out and we said, that's it. We cannot do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no graceful way to leave with your dignity and have the respect of the people you're leaving.
Right.
It's designed that way to keep you captive because you have to give up so much to walk away. But I really think, like in my case, we're all somewhat similar. I have a daughter, and she was a little bit older. She was not a toddler anymore. I think she was 10 years old the last time we set foot in the Kingdom Hall. She was about 7 when I started looking at what you might call apostate stuff. So I, like you, I did not want to, lie to her about the organization and tell her it's the truth when it's not, when I knew it wasn't. And I didn't want her to have to grow up like I grew up. Even, I didn't have a bad upbringing, not like some.
No, me neither.
But still, I did not want her to have to get to the point where she was going to be baptized, and then for me to leave, she would then have to make a choice.
Right.
So, I thought about fading, and I tried to fade somewhat, but it ended up very quick once it started. I just had to go. So, at this point, sorry, but a side point as well is, it sounds like we were both fortunate to be able to leave with our spouses.
Yeah.
You hear some really horror stories about custody battles and divorces and things. So I'm super grateful that I left with my family intact. It's been 5 years now, and we've since divorced, but like I said, we're excellent friends, and it sounds like you've got a still growing and happy family, and so congratulate you for being able to leave with your wife as well. Now, how did you break it to one another that you had doubts about the organization? Was there a specific conversation that you can recall that came up that it was like, oh, you don't believe either? Oh, I don't believe either. I mean, how did that happen?
No, it's like I said, with Sarah and I, it was such a slow, long process that if I really trace it back, it's funny because I always say to Sarah, I was the one who, was really got things going, and she'll always remind me that when we were dating, she came to me and it was some specific question about some doctrinal thing, and at the time, I had just given up college, given up my girlfriend, given up my friends, and I was into it. So for her to even approach me with a doubt at that point, I just didn't want to hear it. And so she remembers that. I blocked that out, I guess. I can't remember what the point was, but that was when we were dating. So that had to be 2003. But by 2007, I think, 6 maybe, it wasn't anything major. I didn't stumble onto an apostate website. I didn't get offended by someone. It was nothing catastrophic for me. I just remember sitting at the hall, and I remember my earliest memory is I remember them talking. It was a Watchtower study that talked about the ransom. It was describing everything about the ransom. And I just remember sitting there thinking for the first time ever, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't get that.
Right.
And it just, more and more things went on like that. And I did the whole, what you're supposed to do when you're a Jehovah's Witness and that happens to you. I went home, I thought about it, I prayed about it. Then I went and did some research on it, and I didn't find the answers, and it kept bothering me. So then I went and talked to the elders, and I don't even know if they went and did their research, but, I expressed my doubts and whatever, and I didn't get the answer that satisfied me. So that kind of, kept nagging me. And then I think it's like this for a lot of people. When you start having one doubt and you start realizing that, like, wow, I just always just sat there and took everything they said as like, these are the facts because it's printed in Watchtower magazine. When you realize, like, well, I don't agree with this one thing, then it changes the way you hear everything from that point on. And that's exactly what happened to me. And it just happened so slowly because I still found things that I did believe in. I was surrounded by a lot of good friends and family and people that I really loved. And so I wanted what Watchtower magazine was saying to be true. I wanted it to be the truth. But there was always this part of me that was, in I guess my conscience saying, but you don't believe it, Joe. You know you don't.
Right.
And it only got worse. I mean, eventually it became harder and harder to do everything. And so I did like the slowest fade. I mean, that was probably the opposite of you. I did the slowest fade in the history of fades.
Yeah. Well, once, a good point that you made right there, once your mind is able to accept that it might not be true, then you're open to examine things. At that point on, you're able to look at everything that comes in with a critical eye and analyze it rather than just swallow it whole. You can accept things based on authority because they're supposedly smarter than you or more spiritual than you, or they are directed by Holy Spirit and I'm not, so who am I to question? But once the organization is no longer on that pedestal and they're just guys like me, then you can look at them differently and think about them and the things that they're saying and decide, does this make sense or doesn't it, as opposed to just swallowing it whole. So I think that's a good point you made about getting at that point where once you've not accepted something, the door is open that they can be wrong about things.
Yeah, exactly.
So you are free with your wife and your kids. Your kids are being raised in a normal family.
Yeah.
I prefer the word normal to worldly. There are Jehovah's Witnesses and there are normal people as opposed to witnesses and worldly people. At least that's the terminology I prefer anyway. But are you still in that, you mentioned the difficulty about leaving the community, the job on the farm, your family, your Jehovah's Witness family. So are you still physically in that same environment, job-wise, the same town?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is what I do feel like our situation is just an anomaly because I still work with my dad and my brother every day. My dad is my neighbor to the left, and my brother is my neighbor to the right. My dad and mom are pretty decent about the whole thing. They definitely go beyond what they're supposed to do as far as shunning me.
Mm-hmm.
My brother and his wife are about as strict as they come. He does have to talk to me about some, necessary business matters, but, he does not. If, I'll bring our kids down to the farm and he ignores my children, won't obviously doesn't let his kids have anything to do with
Mhm.
ours, with us.
Are they about the same age, his kids and your
Oh
kids?
yeah. Our kids are 6'4", almost 2, and 5 months. His are 4, 3, and a year. So if everything stays as it is, his oldest son and our oldest girl would be in the same class in school. The 2 youngest girls would be in the same class in school. We go to the same school.
Mhm.
So it's a really, really strange, challenging situation. Our extended families are close, so we still try to get together for family reunions that now my brother and his wife won't have any part of if we're there. So it's a really strange situation. My brother and I actually were partners on the farm until even before I got disfellowshipped. He told me, because we had stopped going to meetings and because I was, quote unquote, promoting apostasy, that he no longer wanted to be my partner. We broke up our business together, and so he's doing his own thing. My dad's kind of stuck in the middle. It's a really, really just a toxic environment in which to live, and it's just been so poisonous to my entire extended family. That really did an amazing job throughout our lives, trying to accept, my parents and us, in spite of the fact that we were witnesses, always trying to include us. They went out of their way, just way above and beyond what they had to do to involve us and keep us included. And, when this happened, it's just really severed the relationship, between my brother and I, which has made it impossible to have the close family that they've worked so hard to keep, in spite of the fact that my parents, had all of these rules that they didn't understand. So,
yeah. So most of the other family are not Jehovah's Witnesses because your parents converted as adults, and so they're your aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff. They're all normal, not
Right.
witnesses. Okay, so it's your parents and your brother who are physically closest to you, and basically you're surrounded by Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay.
I should give my parents credit. My parents are good, about as good as they can get away with being.
Okay. I'm going to hold Joe for a moment there, and because I think we can all identify with the things that he's experienced to one degree or another. The difficulty of leaving the organization knowing that people are going to cut you off, some more than others, but some will completely cut you off. And the threat of that happening forces many people to stay when they otherwise would leave. And I was so impressed with the Royal Commission and how they really understand this in relation to victims of pedophilia and other forms of abuse. They just get it. So I wanted to show a clip of Mr. Stewart questioning the Watchtower Branch Committee Chairman, Mr. O'Brien, about Jehovah's Witness shunning and how it really looks to rational people. Probably how it also looks to Joe's extended non-witness family when they see, the brother shunning. And so this is how it came up at the Australian Royal Commission. And if the video's not smooth, don't worry. Hopefully the sound will be clear. And, that's the important thing. The YouTube upload later will hopefully have clearer video on it. Now, okay, to set up this clip, we're in mid-testimony here, and Mr. Stewart has just read a quote from a Watchtower publication about whether it's okay to give a disfellowshipped person a ride to and from the meetings, and how you're supposed to not talk to them if you do. So it picks up from there. Here is Mr. Angus Stewart interviewing, getting testimony from Mr. O'Brien, the chairman of the Australian Branch Committee.
Such assistance would be viewed as similar to public transportation in that there should be no fraternizing or conversing with the disfellowshipped or disassociated person. So that's the principle, isn't it? No conversing or fraternizing with a disassociated person.
That's correct, yes.
And then in the next paragraph, if members of the congregation are known to have undue association with disfellowshipped or disassociated relatives who are not in the household, elders should counsel and reason with those members of the congregation from the scriptures. So the position is that if a disassociated person is in the same household as a Jehovah's Witness on everyday matters in the household, there can be that association. But if they're not in the same household, the same rules apply as if they were not in the same family.
Yes, so with disfellowshipping and disassociation, if they live in the same household, then it's understood that it's referring then to spiritual association. Obviously, if it's a husband or wife or child or mother or father, of necessity there has to be conversation. But it's the spiritual association that would now be restricted.
But if they're not in the same household, then social association is also restricted.
Yeah, kept to a minimum at least.
Yes. And you see there's then a reference there, review with them information from God's Love book, pages 207 and 208. I'd like to take you to that. Part of this document is already in the tender bundle, but not this part.
Thank you.
And so we to understand that these pages here, 207 and 208, are the guidance that's being referred to at what we were looking at a moment before. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you'll see halfway down page 207, starting on the right-hand side, it says, the Watchtower of September 15, 1981, page 25, stated, a simple hello.
Sorry, I've just missed where you are. Oh, you're in the paragraph 2.
Yes, halfway down the page.
Yes, okay.
The Watchtower in 1981 stated, a simple hello to someone can be the first step that develops into a conversation and maybe even a friendship. Would we want to take that first step with a disfellowshipped person? Now, we to understand that is applying also to a disassociated person, aren't we?
Yes.
Is strict avoidance really necessary? The question's asked. Yes, for several reasons. First, it is a matter of loyalty to God and His Word. We obey Jehovah not only when it is convenient, but also when doing so presents real challenges. Love for God moves us to obey all of His commandments, and so on. And at the foot of the next page, 208, starting the second line from the bottom, you'll see it says, loyal Christian family members do not look for excuses to have dealings with a disfellowshipped relative. Now that applies also to a disassociated relative, not living at home.
Yes.
Rather, loyalty to Jehovah and His organization moves them to uphold the scriptural arrangement of disfellowshipping. Their loyal course has the best interests of the wrongdoer at heart and may help them to benefit from the distance received. And indeed, there are other publications that set out these forms of principle, aren't there?
That's true, yes, that's an understanding I have.
Yes. Now, the consequence in the scenario that I put to you is that this survivor of abuse who wishes to leave the organization is put to a choice, isn't she? She either stays in the organization or she leaves and thereby potentially loses her whole family, or much of it, depending on how many remain in the witnesses, and her social network.
No, I think there's that other option that you missed there is by just ceasing her activity in the congregation.
Well, I'm presupposing, Mr. O'Brien, that her feeling is sufficiently intense that she wishes to disassociate from the organisation.
Yes, so then she would appreciate the implication of that.
Yes, and her friends and family would face the implication too that they would have to disassociate from her.
Yes.
It's an impossible choice, isn't it? I mean, no one, is it not right, Mr. O'Brien, should be put to the choice of remaining in an organisation which she feels is protective of her abuser and losing her family and social network.
Well, I can only be guided by what the scriptures say on that.
Well, do you accept that it's psychologically devastating and cruel?
The whole purpose of disfellowshipping or disassociation is to help the person see the benefits of associating. So a disassociated person, a disfellowshipped person, is free to come back. A disassociated person particularly, they don't have to go through a lengthy procedure to come back, whereas a disfellowshipped person has to prove their repentance suitably.
Well, it makes your organisation a captive organisation, doesn't it?
I don't follow what you mean by that.
Well, it makes it incredibly hard for someone to leave because of the huge pain, suffering, cruelty that she must face if she does leave.
I don't believe so.
Do you appreciate, Mr. O'Brien, that this point of shunning, as it's called, is the one that probably makes people the most angry around the world amongst the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah. Nailed it. Boom. Mr. Angus Stewart gets it. Shunning is psychologically devastating and cruel, and it makes the organization a captive religion. That is a perfect summary from someone who impartially collected facts and analyzed them, and really has no previous to this commission, as far as I know, interaction, membership with Jehovah's Witnesses. He has no axe to grind other than his desire for justice and to protect children. By the way, this was the most fired up I saw Mr. Stewart get in the entire proceedings. He did a great job remaining calm, but making powerful points and asking pointed and revealing questions throughout the public hearings, just to show that this whole concept of shunning, it's not like the Jehovah's Witnesses say it's designed to teach people a lesson, keep the congregation clean, bring people back. It's to keep people in. And we heard already how difficult it was for Joe and his wife to leave, even knowing that it wasn't the truth, because of this threat of shunning and losing your entire social structure. So let's get back to Joe now and hear the next part of his interview. You know, because of the way Jehovah's Witnesses treat their former members, even shunning immediate family, like your brother, it's really not easy to be an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and you've really expressed the difficulty of making that decision to become an ex-Jehovah's Witness. So you had mentioned before we started recording and also on Facebook that you wanted to take some steps to deal with that situation in a positive way this summer. And so you decided to attend a regional convention for one of the sessions. Is that correct?
I did, yes.
So what was your rationale for that? What were your goals? What did you hope to accomplish there?
So I put that on my Facebook post, and I went to the when the circuit overseer was here. The first time after I was disfellowshipped, I went to the meeting when the CO came, and I felt like it was important for a couple of reasons that time. And what I found, what really struck me the most, was how different it sounded to sit there as someone who is fully awake and hear the way that they talk.
Mm-hmm.
Hear the way that the information is presented, the way that they take a verse in the Bible and the way they apply it, or just their whole general way of reasoning, or teaching, I guess you can call it. And so, and the other thing was, I talked to my mom after I went, and she told me how hard it was to sit there and listen to it knowing that I was there. And I guess this may have been like, maybe it wasn't the kindest thing of me, but I kind of tucked that away, and I was like, yeah. And I thought about that a lot. I was like, I remember what it felt like, when you or I would be at a Sunday meeting, and we're going through the Watchtower like we are every Sunday, and normally you're spooning it in. But if someone was there that was maybe a Bible study, or maybe someone had a relative visiting that they convinced to come to the hall, it just always sounded so different to me if they were there, because I put myself in their position and said, wow, that must sound really strange to them, not understanding what we believe. Or if you don't know the terminology, if you don't believe this, it's not so easy to say, everyone's going to be eaten by birds like piles of manure.
Right. Yeah.
I knew that, but I guess what I hoped was, if I went to the convention, and I specifically chose Saturday afternoon because I came across, I think it actually was on JW Survey, I saw that the part praising the parents for shunning their child.
Right, yeah.
And so I wanted to be there for that, because I guess, first of all, I hoped that if I was there and people knew that I was there, that maybe they would just stop and think that, what does that sound like? Maybe to my family. But after going, I realized that it was much more something that I did for myself than I probably did for anyone there.
Well, now I'm going to sort of pause Joe again. Don't mean to interrupt him all evening long, but I would like to bring you up to speed on what he's talking about with that part that he wanted to see at the convention about parents shunning their child. And rather than explain it, I'm just going to play it for you. And again, like the other video, if it's choppy, don't worry. The full clear video hopefully will be on YouTube once I get it uploaded, and I think the sound should still be clear regardless of video quality. So this is an assembly part from this summer's regional convention that is focusing on parenting and how they shunned their disfellowshipped child.
Do all that we can to bring our children up in the truth and to build them up spiritually. However, even though parents sometimes spend tireless efforts, some children may not respond in a positive way at first. However, we never, ever give up on our children, do we? In line with this, we'd like to now speak with Robert and Brenda Sutton. They too serve as Bethelites at the Warwick facility. And prior to coming to New York, Brother and Sister Sutton raised 3 children. Brother and Sister Sutton, tell us a little bit about your spiritual routine as you raised your 3 children.
Well, we attended the meetings regularly. The children knew that Saturday mornings were for field service, and every week we had a family worship.
And we also, at one point, changed our family worship night to Friday night, and it coupled with that a family fun night, and where we spent quality time with just us as a family.
So it sounds like you two set a great example in training your children spiritually. However, at a certain point, you mentioned something changed with one of your children. Could you share that with us?
Well, at one point, one of our children took a job and was exposed to questionable association with coworkers, and sadly, this led to a disfellowshipping.
Tell us, how did you handle that bitter disappointment?
Well, it was one of the hardest things that I ever had to face. I had many sleepless nights praying to Jehovah, but I came to realize that we needed to trust in what Proverbs 22 and verse 6 says. Train a boy in the way he should go. Even when he grows old, he will not depart from it.
We began to question ourselves as parents. I mean, where did we go wrong? Were we too strict? Were we too lenient? Just what did we do that was wrong? But one thing we did for sure, and that's in addition to multiple times with praying to Jehovah, we made sure that we cling to our spiritual routine.
So we understand that your child is doing well spiritually now. We're very happy about that. What was it that moved your child to return to Jehovah?
Well, it was the missed association with the family, and here's why. I had always told our kids, I told our kids that I would die for you, I love you, would die for you, but if you ever leave Jehovah, I wouldn't be there. And they knew that we wouldn't waver on this. But sad to say, and as hard as it was, we had to cut off all association.
So one final thought, if you could. There may be others in our audience who are undergoing a similar experience. Could you share something specific that helped the both of you to endure this difficult situation?
Well, for me, I was encouraged to continue to pioneer, and even though I knew I would just be a body in the car, my friends encouraged me to come out anyway, where they listened to me, they laughed with me, and they cried with me, and that's just what I needed.
And for me, I always knew that Jehovah expected me, as the head of the family, to take the lead, to step up and take the lead when it came to the discipline and mental regulating of Jehovah. But when I realized that this time the discipline was coming from Jehovah himself, I had to not step up, but I had to step back and loyally follow Jehovah in the way that he was running this discipline. And this is what helped me to understand my role in the situation.
Well, we want to thank you both very much for your excellent example and sharing that personal experience.
Wow. I told our kids I would die for you, I love you, would die for you, but if you ever leave Jehovah, I wouldn't be there. I'm pretty sure that's not what love is at all. God, what a horrible cult that would do that to a family. I mean, I don't even think that needs any further commentary, that they consider their shunning discipline from Jehovah. We've got a worldly person earlier, Mr. Stewart, who gets it. And then we have these indoctrinated drone parents disowning their kid to emotionally blackmail him to returning to their cult. And yet, they paint the world as evil. Really? Really? Ugh. But there is hope. Even though it's painful and we're shunned by people who think they love us and who should love us, we can be happy because there are real, genuine people who genuinely do love us. Let's get back to Joe and see how he's doing now. The speakers and the rationale and the application of scriptures sounds so different after you've been out for a while and your mind has cleared from that. Do you find it sounds, really culty? And you're like, how did I ever believe this?
Yes. That is it. I feel like what they use more than anything that really stood out to me was false dichotomy. For instance, the talk on young ones, it was the first part in the afternoon session in the symposium on imitate Jesus, and then it was all different members of the family. And the speaker put a question out there, and I'm not going to say it verbatim, but the general point was, young ones, do you want to imitate Jesus or youths of this world? Like, there's no in between. There's no other way you can go. You can either be like Jesus or youths of this world. Now, of course, everyone there knows when he says imitate Jesus, he means be a Jehovah's Witness.
Right.
And so then he goes on to say, well, why shouldn't you imitate the youths of the world? Because they're not happy. And I just thought to myself, how dare he? How dare he speak for every non-Jehovah's Witness young person on earth?
Mm-hmm.
They're not happy. And then he goes on to say, on the other hand, Jehovah's Witness, or whatever he said, true Christian youths are happy and are successful. And just like that, when you're out of it and you hear them say things like that is that binary, that black and white. No one in the world is happy. All Jehovah's Witnesses are happy and successful. At first it shocked me, and then it took me right back to being 17 years old. And I understood why I did what I did.
Mm-hmm.
Because I sat there and I heard him say that, and I trusted that guy.
Yeah.
Because he was, as they say, an elder from the blah, blah, blah congregation. He was a pioneer.
Yep.
And you trust them. And then when they say things like that, and they ask you a question and then they give you the answer, it works.
Yeah.
But going back now, yes, like you said, did it sound culty? Way, way more than I thought it even would. I thought they would try to hide it, honestly. I was like, it can't be that blatant as I think it would be. And it was. It was difficult to listen to.
Mm. It's amazing, I think, how much your mind can change once it becomes free from that regular indoctrination. And it makes you realize the reasons and understand why the organizations run the way it is, why they stress regular meeting attendance, regular field service, and it's that repetition, almost like a mantra, and the way that they do oftentimes ask rhetorical questions and then give you the correct answer from their perspective, correct answer, and set up these, us versus them false dichotomies. And it's that us and them thing that makes you a team player. Nothing unites a group of people more than having a common enemy. And they do that over and over. And when you're young and impressionable, I mean, you buy in out of fear, out of being convinced, out of wanting to maintain everything that you feel is right. There are multiple personal reasons for sticking with it, which is why it's so admirable when you see people figure it out and leave.
Right.
And on the other side of those people are ones that happen to be disfellowshipped and are out in the world as normal people and never figure it out. And those are just totally tragic because they're living in guilt all the time, thinking that Jehovah God hates them and is going to destroy them. So being mentally free is kind of the key to what I'm hoping to do with Cult Free Radio. I know that we've just met recently on Facebook, and this is our first time speaking, so you may not be familiar with it even. I was newly out about a year since the last meeting I had been to in 2011 when I started doing Cult Free Radio, and I did it for about a year. You have that sort of first bit of enthusiasm when you're first out, and then the real world takes over and you get busy doing other things. But I really have long wanted to get back to doing Cult Free Radio, and no matter how many people I interview, there's so much that we all have in common, and yet there's so much unique. And it's scary how much we have in common. I mean, that's more evidence that it actually is a cult, because they do everything so robotically and so rote to everybody. But then again, it never gets boring because everybody's got a unique twist, and we've all got our own experiences, both while we were in and after getting out. So you are free with your family, and you still work the farm with your dad, and your brother. After attending the convention this summer and mulling over some of these things, what do you, I mean, obviously you can't predict with 100% certainty, but do you have any thoughts on what might happen in the future for you as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, your family that are Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever? Actually, I'm going to leave this open-ended. Go where you want with that question.
I think I've been doing that. I've been doing that shit all night, actually. But that's a great question. I think that there was a time, probably when we first stopped going to meetings, that I really thought, and I think maybe this is another common thing, that I could just explain the truth about the Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witnesses to my family, and that they would get it.
Yep. Yep.
I'm not the only one.
Yep. Because you know, they respect me, right? They respect you. You're smart. They know you're smart. They respect you. Of course they'll listen to you. Nope.
It's so funny because I used to always say to my parents, or I would think about with my parents, like, you know, when they joined Witnesses, they tried to convert my entire Catholic family to become witnesses. And of course no one followed them along. But for some reason I thought, no, this is different. This is different. Just like they did. No, we have the truth.
Yep.
And I did the same thing. You know, oh, yeah, but this is the truth. So I thought that, you know, I could use reason and logic and, you know, information and, you know, love, and that would work. And it didn't. And it hasn't. And there are a few people in my family who, and you know, I think if they were in a white Jehovah-proof room, and you ask them, "Do you believe it's the truth?" I think they'd say no. But that's part of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I guess that's part of being in any type of high control group. Is it really doesn't matter sometimes what you really do deep down believe, because your entire world is built around this organization, or this belief system. And even if you don't think it's true, the price that it would cost you to leave it is just too great. And even if that means losing your son or your brother or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews, it's just not enough for some people to be able to take that stand or make that step, or you know, and it's way more complicated than that, of course. I mean, for me, you know, it wasn't overnight, and I don't know at what point my family members are in their belief or in their doubt, so I'll never be able to say. But I guess to answer your question, I'm trying to come to a point where I'm accepting the fact that even if nobody wakes up, if nobody leaves, and if I lose them all, that Sarah and I and the kids can find a way to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
It's a long process, I believe. And I don't think that it just happens by itself. I think the fact that you are thinking about it and that you talk to each other about it will help to expedite it somewhat, as opposed to just, you know, crossing your fingers and hoping. You know, I think that it's important to become self-aware, to know how things stand for yourself, and be able to come to terms with that. So I appreciate you talking to me this evening on Cult Free Radio. I wish you and Sarah and your kids all the best. I hope that things do work out, so that, you know, I'm like you. I don't hold out any sort of false hopes that anyone else in my family is going to wake up at least not based on anything that I say or do, since most of them actually shun me. I'm kind of lucky like you. My parents do not. And my dad, he's always been sort of a half-assed witness anyway. He came in.
Those are the best ones.
Yeah. He came into the organization about 4 years after my mom, mainly because he was tired of being home by himself when Mom dragged me and the other
Little
kids.
did he know what he was getting himself into.
Yeah, exactly. He just started going to meetings just so he wouldn't be home by himself. And, he ended up getting baptized, but he never really was zealous he was a ministerial servant for a couple of years, but he wasn't that into it. And he ended up, one of the times after he moved, he asked not to be reappointed. He just, So he and I are pretty close, and Mom and I are pretty close. Mom, they've at least listened to me, and I think it sounds like from what you said, your parents have at least listened to you.
Yeah.
And, that's a start. And whether, I think you get to a certain point in your life where it is too much to give up. My mom especially, she's in her 80s, and she's looking forward to being resurrected in a new system and being young again and healthy. And I don't know that I even have the right to take that away from her or even try to,
Right.
Freedom for somebody like me, I was 40, 42 at the time. I still had half a lifetime left to live a normal, non-Jehovah's Witness life. And so, I gave up quite a lot, but not nearly as much as I would be asking my parents to give up, So, but you, it sounds like, and I think you mentioned your age, but I didn't jot it down. Can I ask you again, how old were you when you were disfellowshipped or when you stopped attending meetings?
Yeah, 32 I was 31
Okay.
when disfellowshipped, but I stopped going to meetings at 29.
Okay.
And Sarah was the same.
All right, so you have a plenty of normal life left ahead of you. That's good. Well, I appreciate you talking to me this evening, Joe, and joining us on Cult Free Radio. And I wish you and your family all the best, and I'll see you on Facebook.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, Joe. That was Joe Morgan, ladies and gentlemen, Jehovah's Witness cult survivor. It's kind of a bittersweet thing to be free from a cult like Jehovah's Witnesses when you have family that's still in. You're glad to be free. You're glad for those who've escaped with you. You get to reunite and draw closer to other former members as well as your family members who also aren't and perhaps never were Jehovah's Witnesses. And yet there's still that lingering cloud hanging there. The people you care about stuck on the inside and don't even know they're prisoners. It kind of reminds me of Plato's allegory of the cave, which is, if you're not familiar, it's some old school philosophy that really fits this situation kind of like the Matrix, but way back before there were computers, guns, and sunglasses. It's really good stuff. There's a short animated movie narrated by Orson Welles on YouTube. And so if you Google search for Plato's allegory of the cave, Orson Welles, you will find it. And, really check it out. It describes the situation. Now me, I'm out of the cave, out of the cult, but who really is Mad Sweeney? I mean, for those of you who have heard the show before, I introduced myself before I even started Cult Free Radio, the first episode. And then on the 4th of July of that year, I added some more information about myself. And now it's several years later. I'm mostly the same guy as then, though I hope I've continued to grow and evolve. So let's hear a little bit about who is Mad Sweeney from back then, and let's check that out.
For over 40 years, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and for approximately 3 years, a little bit more perhaps now, I've been sort of working my way free from that organization. I feel like I'm completely out, but I do have some family members that are still in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so I still have some sort of connection to that religious organization. So why did I want to do cult-free radio on Ustream? Well, I've been very active over the last few years, participating in online internet message boards, somewhat on Facebook, and there's so many good conversations through that medium that are happening via text and that are preserved, archived for basically all time or for as long as the internet lasts. But I felt like it might be a good opportunity for some of us who are on these message boards or who have friended one another through Facebook to hear each other speak in a sort of live, extemporaneous format where we can talk about some of the same things that we talk about on the message board, but rather than wait for a reply hours or days later, we can get a nice good thread, so to speak, discussed in a matter of an hour or two. So I've also noticed that nobody else is really doing this yet, and I thought it was something that kind of needs to be done. There needs to be some sort of way for former members of high-control religious groups, current members who are sort of questioning and looking for something, information of this sort, and potential recruits so that they can learn what these high-control religious groups, what a lot of people call cults, are all about, how they operate, and what they do to and for their recruits and members. So something live as opposed to on a message board or on Facebook I thought would be helpful, educational, encouraging to those of us who are in a similar situation. And I thought it might be fun, and so far so good. I've only been doing this a few minutes actually, but I'm having a pretty good time. But why me? Why Mad Sweeney? What makes me qualified to do this show? Well, because I live in a free society and I have broken free from a high-control cult or organization, I can. I have a computer with broadband connection. I have a microphone. I actually have a camera too, but you don't want to look at me for 2 hours, believe me. And so I can speak to this topic. I also have some personal experience as a member for over 4 decades, being raised in the Jehovah's Witness organization. Also, I've worked really hard myself the last few years educating myself. I've taken classes at the university on psychology, sociology. I read as much as I can, surfing the internet and books, viewed videos online, and I can recommend some too. On YouTube, you might want to Google or search for Milgrams, Milgrams, Obedience to Authority Experiment. Or you might want to look at Ash's Conformity Experience, and Ash is spelled A-S-H-E. Or Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiments. Or you might want to go on, look for TED Talks. Catherine Schultz recently gave a talk on being wrong. That's the title. And so there's lots of YouTube out there that can educate you on psychology, group dynamics, principles of obedience to authority, especially that can apply to religious cults. conformity is used a lot by religious cults, and a reluctance to be wrong. So those videos that I mentioned might be good. I'll try to document them in text somewhere. If not on Ustream, then I'll definitely do it on Facebook, because I know you can't be sitting there writing down, dictating everything I'm saying, and some of these names you may not have gotten the same spelling. But anyway, those are some videos that I really liked and enjoyed and I thought were educational that I saw online. Also books such as Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. That book is a psychology book written more focused on business, sales, how people persuade one another as far as getting clients. The principles of psychology in that book are no different for religious organizations than they are for somebody who's trying to sell you a vacuum. Sell you a Bible, sell you their organization. It's all the same deal. Another great book on cognitive dissonance, justification, confirmation bias, things such as that, is called Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Another great book that helps members and former cult members to see how these high control organizations operate and operate in the same way is Combating Cult Mind Control by Steve Hassan. I've also read Age of Reason, Thomas Paine, Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz, Captives of a Concept by Don Cameron, In Search of Christian Freedom, also by Raymond Franz, and I'm working on right now reading Teaching Your Child How to Think, which is about educating our kids and ourselves on critical thinking as opposed to just buying everything that's sold to us. So, from all that sort of reading and taking classes over the last couple years and watching YouTubes and all that kind of thing, I feel like I've learned more about the psychology that's used by these high control organizations, either religious or business. They're all similar. And looking back at my own personal experience as a member, I find that they violate what I consider some of the most basic of psychological human rights. And those are the right to complete and truthful information, the right to think and analyze that information autonomously, without pressure, the right to feel whatever emotions one feels without repercussions or threats, without guilt or fear, and the right to choose one's own behaviors based upon thoughtful analysis of that complete and truthful information in a way that can produce for ourselves real positive feelings of joy, love, friendship. And these are things that high control religious groups take away from people or manipulate so that people believe that they have, but they actually don't. And so this is what I'd like to talk about on our first show, which is, again, is coming up Saturday night, April 30th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And I hope everybody will enjoy it. I hope enough people will participate so that you don't have to listen to my voice for a couple hours straight. We can have a conversation as opposed to a monologue. I think we're going to really have a good time. I know it can be sort of a drag sometimes to talk about the problems that we've been through, the things we've experienced in the past. But I think also seeing that we're not unique in one particular organization. The Jehovah's Witnesses are not unique. And that our own personal situation is not unique. Each of us have gone through many similar things. And then in another way, we are all unique in a way. So we can share both our similarities, our differences, and we'll come out of this weekend hopefully much stronger for it, able to face the future, because freeing ourselves from these sorts of organizations, it really it sets us up for a better future, a future that we can enjoy real relationships that we know are genuine, based on information that we know we've seen and learned all sides of the issue, and that we've been allowed to think and feel the way that we want to think and feel about this information that we receive, and that we can choose how we're going to live our lives from today on and every day for the rest of our lives. Well, that was a clip from the introduction I did back in April, and one thing I noticed when I listened to it again was that it was an introduction to the Mad Sweeney of Cult Free Radio, but it kind of glossed over a lot of who Mad Sweeney the person is. I gave a little bit of my background as a witness, but I feel like I get questions and there's more to say. And so, for instance, people ask, why Mad Sweeney if that's not your real name? Where did that come from? Well, I've been participating in internet message boards for quite a long time, actually since before there were internet message boards, back when there were text-based Usenet news groups. There was a thing called roundtable discussions on Genie, which was a General Electric sort of internet service. And as internet usage grew and became popular in the mid to late 90s, security became an issue for people participating online. And like most people online at the time, we figured out that it's probably not a good idea to use your own name. And so, being a fan of science fiction and fantasy, as I mentioned in the social stream, I was a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't read nonfiction. I read basically all fiction, including The Watchtower and The Awake magazine. So, as a fan of science fiction and fantasy, I tended to pick character names from some of my favorite books, shows, and movies. And this was before The Watchtower really came out strongly against online associations. They're always about 5 to 10 years behind the curve of things, and sometimes even longer. But there were a lot of witnesses going online at the time, some to talk religion and defend their faith, and but I was just more interested in sports and science fiction groups, and so I rarely got into religious discussions at the time. And so at that time, I would go by different characters, the Dread Pirate Roberts, or the Marquis de Carabas, or different characters from books I've read. And Mad Sweeney, in addition to be a legendary Irish king who went crazy, he's also a character from the Neil Gaiman novel American Gods, which, by the way, may become an HBO miniseries within the next year or two. And this character is a tall, skinny, leprechaun-type figure who ends up drinking himself to death because nobody believes in him anymore. And basically he's the opposite of the real me, who's a short, chubby, American-type figure who doesn't drink at all anymore because I've learned to believe in myself. And so I always go with the science fiction or fantasy-type character, and in a lot of places online I am the Dread Pirate Roberts. But for the sake of keeping my cult-free religious life separate from the rest of my life, especially online and off, you won't see Mad Sweeney on a NFL site or a NCAA hockey discussion board or on any of the science fiction boards. I'm still there, but under those other names. And so for religious and cult-free discussions, in addition to cult-free radio, I participate a lot, as most of you know, on Jehovah'sWitness.net. I'm increasingly participating in some Facebook groups like the one Ruben mentioned, ex-Jehovah's Witness Recovery 3, also The End Is Nigh, but this time we really mean it. Also, I've contributed to www.xjw.com. There's a dash in there, x-jw.com. And so I'm pretty busy online with that kind of stuff. There's also a group for Cult Free Radio on Facebook as well. Now, when I was just a toddler, as I mentioned in the recorded part, I was 2 years old when my mom started studying, or at least became a return visit. And my sister was already a witness at the time and was trying to take me to meetings and trying to get Mom to go as well. And so, before long, Mom was studying the Truth Book, and she was baptized at the district convention in 1975. So I was basically raised a Jehovah's Witness. And like most Jehovah's Witnesses who grew up in the organization, I got married young, but I was very, very lucky. My wife is somebody I'm happy to spend the rest of my life with, and so many of my witness friends who I grew up with are either already divorced or they are stuck in marriages they're unhappy with because they just don't have one of the excuses or reasons that the Watchtower allows for divorce. There are a few happily married witness friends that I've grown up with as well, but there are a lot who are not. So I'm very thankful for my wife and the marriage I have. Now, while I was a witness, I progressed pretty slowly compared to a lot of brothers, and I think it was because of a couple things. And one of them was that I was way too honest for my own good. You know, I would never go around saying things that I didn't mean, like a lot of guys did, like, I really wish I could pioneer and go to Bethel. I've been praying about it. I wouldn't say those things just to make myself look more spiritual than the people around me. And I never really had interest in either of those things that would have put me on the fast track for becoming an elder. Now, I've known kids who, in their mid-20s, were appointed as elders because of their pioneering and spending a few years in Bethel service. But I took a slow, steady pace, knowing that that kid who was appointed in his 20s would probably be burned out and stepping down by the time I even got appointed. So eventually, in my late 30s, I became a ministerial servant, and I quickly started getting assignments like public talks and the Watchtower conductor for the small foreign language group my family was in. And I put in a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of gas money traveling all over the place to give talks and trying to convince others there to come to our little neck of the woods to give talks too. You know, it was kind of fun for me. I enjoyed that a lot more than I enjoyed going out in field service. But if I had stayed, I was on track for probably becoming an elder at some point, since I had been conducting the Watchtower and giving public talks and those sorts of things. But then something happened. Something, just as I was getting my feet under me as a ministerial servant, something happened to open my mind that the people running the organization were basically delusional. As somebody raised as a Jehovah's Witness, I knew there were times when guys who were relative dopes from the perspective of the real world would work the system and manage to get appointed as elders. But I felt like most Jehovah's Witnesses feel that they were the exception rather than the rule, and that Jehovah would work it out in his own due time. What I didn't know was that delusional thoughts and ideas originated with the organization itself. And here's how I found out. I always had a really good sort of personal relationship with the men on the body of elders, basically because they were mostly my peers. Some were a little bit older, some were somewhat younger. We were all men of equal status, or so I thought. Now, there came a point where there was an internal decision that the body of elders made that was going to be detrimental to the foreign language group I was working with. And it was going to also create a ton of extra work for me personally. And so, you know, being with the guys, my friends, I thought, I complained out loud verbally about it, thinking, you know, my gripe has merit, and knowing that most of the elders on the body didn't really have a clue about the impact that their particular decision was going to have. So I complained out loud. I didn't think too much of it, and I thought, well, that was that. Well, a couple of weeks later, the presiding overseer, which they were still called at the time, asked me to meet with him and another elder to discuss some of the concerns he heard I was having. Well, great. I thought, all right, somebody's actually listening to me and going to do something about this. Well, that little bit of optimism was short-lived, because the meeting with the elders ended up consisting of counsel on pride, counsel on questioning, counsel on obedience, and it culminated with the presiding overseer applying Revelation chapter 1, verse 20 which is the scripture where Christ is said to hold the stars in his right hand, they applied that to themselves as those stars. And he said that according to Watchtower doctrine, and I checked later to make sure that the elders weren't making it up, questioning a decision by a body of elders is equal to challenging the authority of Jesus Christ himself. Well, there is no arguing with that kind of lunacy. I knew these guys. They had no special insight, and especially no specific insight into this foreign language stuff. They weren't representing Jesus in this prideful viewpoint they had. They were just using that as an excuse so they wouldn't have to rethink their decision and perhaps admit that they were wrong and that a lowly ministerial servant was correct. So from that day on, I didn't take anything said by any of the organization leadership at face value anymore. Because really, how can you tell a human being not to think, not to ask questions, and then expect him to remain compliant and obedient and still be content at the same time? I mean, it obviously works on millions of people, but this specific thing was what kind of broke the spell over me, so that I no longer felt that it would be wrong to research and explore outside of the organization literature. Because at that point, I knew that the leadership was a fraud hiding behind a facade of authority. And so the rest is history, as they say. It took several years. I continued to remain a ministerial servant, several years before I stepped down from that. I kept researching on the internet, in secret, in private, before I was really finally convinced that there was nothing in the Watchtower organization worth continuing to put faith in. And one of the final straws that really turned me off was the February 15, 2009 Watchtower article called "They Keep Following the Lamb." And that article had actual subheadings called "Jehovah Trusts the Slave" and "The Slave is Trusted by Jesus." And the point of the whole article was that you rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses better trust the slave too. I was still conducting the Watchtower at that time, and it was incredibly painful to conduct, knowing that the entire thing was a lie. But even so, it took another whole year or more to finally get to fade out of the organization for good, because basically I wasn't going to leave without my wife and daughter, without my family. And the story of how we managed to get together and get on the same page is kind of a long one that I'll bring out at another time, because we do want to get to the other great interviews we have tonight. We know that it's not easy to get out of the Watchtower, even alone, but to get out with your whole family, it's a challenge. It's difficult. Now, as I said in the earlier segment that was recorded back in April, I really decided that I wanted to do a talk radio show that was from a secular perspective, because a lot of the discussion groups, a lot of the websites, a lot of the call-in shows and things are from a religious perspective, from a Christian perspective, and I feel like there needed to be something from a secular perspective, because when your criticism of the Watchtower is based on the view that they're doctrinally wrong, for example, that they're wrong about the divinity of Christ or about the rejection of the cross, you're missing what I think is the real issue, which are the Watchtower's violation of those 4 fundamental human rights: the right to complete and truthful information, the right to think and analyze that information autonomously, the right to feel whatever emotions one feels without the fear of repercussions, and the right to choose one's own behavior based upon thoughtful analysis of that complete and truthful information in a way that produces real, positive feelings of friendship and joy and unconditional love. So the Watchtower's biggest crime isn't that they don't believe in the Trinity or some other such religious doctrine. It's the way they violate those 4 basic human rights consistently and persistently as a mechanism to mentally and to an extent physically enslave members of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And this topic really isn't being talked about anywhere else that I could find, and I think it's important to have an avenue to discuss it. So I decided sometime in the middle of April this year to start Cult Free Radio Show, and I actually presented the first show on April 30th. It's interesting, when I was a witness, I would think and plan and not actually do anything unless and until I felt it was ready and perfect. And that's a real stressful way to go through life. And for the time that I've been cult-free, I've been working on living just the opposite. There's a thing in Eastern philosophy called Wu Wei, which is kind of a more intuitive and relaxed way of approaching life. I think a lot of people in Western society hear about it and they feel like, well, that's just being lazy, but it's not that at all. You know, going with the flow, accepting the things that you can't change, understanding the things you can, and following your intuition a little bit more is really working out for me, I think. And even though I still plan each show, I don't stress over how it's going to come out, how I'm going to do things. So I feel like the show is going well, and I have to admit part of it is a catharsis for myself, and even if nobody ever listened, I'd still be stronger and healthier for having done it. And on the other hand, though, I really, really hope that it does help others. I hope that as Cult Free Radio progresses on, it won't just be a channel for me to talk and voice my own thoughts and that's it. I hope it becomes a means of interaction and support and education for others. When a person escapes from a high-control religious group, they remain vulnerable for a period of time. And some people of faith could take advantage of that situation and offer a quick and easy substitute for the Watchtower Society that comes in the form of their own church. But however well-meaning that recruitment might be, it doesn't allow the person to explore and experience what real freedom is. It doesn't allow them the time they need to heal or provide them the tools they need to make their own way free in the world, free from oppressive religious influence. So I hope Cult Free Radio can provide an enlightening avenue for self-understanding and a supportive network for embracing freedom. Now, I don't expect to, of course, bring down the Watchtower Society. It's a multi-billion-dollar international corporation with dozens of branches all over the world, and anyone who thinks he can bring down that organization is fooling himself and misleading other people. I really honestly care far less about the corporation than I do about people. Fact is, people are leaving Jehovah's Witnesses every day, and we can also see from the Watchtower's yearbook reports that the growth in the religion is pretty stagnant in lands with a high standard of education. So the purpose, I think, of Cult Free Radio is twofold. Primarily, it's here to educate and support former witnesses and current witnesses who might be considering leaving. And secondarily, if we can educate potential recruits about the tactics that high-control religions have, like Jehovah's Witnesses, and thereby prevent them from joining, we've accomplished even more. So I don't expect the Watchtower Society to go bankrupt or disappear in our lifetimes. But if the religion stops growing, or if its growth rate falls below even the birth rate at some point over the next few decades, I think we could consider that a victory. But more importantly, if Cult Free Radio helps somebody who's left the organization through their healing process, if it convinces somebody to embrace freedom of thought and independence of action, their own autonomy, or if it teaches someone who may have been recruited the things that they need to know to save them from joining, then Cult Free Radio has done its job. So I try not to use the phrase "I believe in" anymore, because there are things that I know or am relatively certain about because of the abundance of evidence and the high degree of likelihood that they're real. For instance, I'm pretty sure I'm saying these words right now and that they're being recorded and that other real people somewhere out there are hearing them. But there are things in the universe with far less evidence and a far lower degree, or sometimes even unknown degree, of likelihood that many people choose to believe in. despite the lack of tangible support. And sometimes those beliefs could be helpful in organizing people into communities who work together and accomplishing things that individually the members wouldn't have been able to achieve. But most of the time, however, it's my opinion that it's more beneficial to create communities around relative certainties rather than around mere beliefs. And something I'm relatively certain about is that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have been victims of the Watchtower cult, Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think we all spent enough time waiting on Jehovah to solve our problems while we did relatively little to solve them for ourselves. So as we all become together more and more cult-free, we can shed the shackles of belief and embrace the freedoms that are the right of all intelligent beings. We can heal our damaged hearts, minds, and bodies and work together to help heal one another. So that is Mad Sweeney's testimony for the evening.
And that was recorded, the first part in April of 2011 and the second part in July of 2011. This is the first Cult-Free Radio show since late January or early February, I don't recall the exact date, of 2012. So we're looking at 4 years from that time. A couple of the things that I mentioned there, one was how I didn't rush out of the organization until I was sure my wife and daughter were coming with me, and that I would explain that on a later show, and I have. The show from, I believe it was September of 2011, talks about that and interviews other couples who left the organization together as well, kind of like Joe and Sarah, who we heard from earlier this evening. So those are on YouTube. Other things, updates since that time. As you heard me talking to Joe earlier, my wife and I are divorced. We're still very good friends. She, in fact, currently is staying at my house with my daughter and I. So we're kind of like a family still, but we're just not together romantically. So things are good. 4 years down the road from the Mad Sweeney you just heard. Mad Sweeney is still happy, doing well. I'm still at the same job, and now I'm back to doing Cult-Free Radio. The schedule is not set, certainly not set in stone. It's kind of jotted in pencil. I'm going to try to do a show per month. I've got a few guests lined up. I don't have the interview dates yet, but I think it's going to be fun. It's I'm a little more chill, perhaps, than I was then. But I'm enjoying it, and I appreciate everybody who's tuned in this evening on the live show, or who might be listening on YouTube as I post it at a later date, which is hopefully going to be soon. I am going to need to do some editing first, because this entire last segment had no image on the screen. It was just audio only. So I'll tweak that before I upload it, put something for you to look at while you're listening in case you want to. And I may try to fix the sound a little bit too, because it was pretty uneven. I don't know if I'll have time to do that or not. But that wraps up the 14th Cult-Free Radio show, and the first of the new style Cult-Free Radio show that actually includes some video. I didn't used to do video at all. So I've really missed doing it the last few years, and so I'm glad to be back, and we'll continue to reveal more about who I am personally, what's going on in the Jehovah's Witness and ex-Jehovah's Witness world. We'll continue to interview guests that are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and hopefully have a good time and help one another to continue to progress, heal, and just appreciate life and one another. So thank you all for tuning in. Please find Cult-Free Radio and like it on Facebook. That would be awesome. Tell your friends about it, and I will post information about the next show whenever I have that available. Good night, everybody.
Free your mind.